Sounds like a very odd title. I hope a lot of you understand and appreciate that I'm not trying to use cheap sensationalism, but I am trying to get your attention when I say that Solomon actually met the so-called mysterious people of Mu and Maya, or the Mayan Indians of the Americas. Yes, as preposterous as it may sound, the trouble with the Western man, the European, well, more so with those here in the United States, like I think that the Christed one, he predicted that he said his people would perish for lack of knowledge. And I do not, well, yes, maybe I would say that this could be life-threatening. It's just like every day I am horrified and I want to cry out when I go to the grocery stores and I see people buying toothpaste. Because if you'll read on your toothpaste, it says fluoride. And the fluoride that they use is a man-made fluoride from aluminum. And it gives you nearly, it's a slow lobotomy. A lobotomy. This is what the Germans dumped down the wells of Poland and other areas that they invaded to stop the resistant fighters. There is so many things that affect our very lives and our diets. Why is it we have so many people suddenly becoming senile in our age? There's something starting it, but this is not the topic of my subject, but I feel that there's so many things in these closing hours that man has got to become conscious of or he shall perish. And it seems like every mystery solved brings us to the threshold of a greater one. Let's see, it was Rochelle Carson that said that. I do not know how many years ago. But a traveler, by my faith, you have great reason to be sad. I fear you sold your own lands to see other men's. Then to have seen much and to have nothing is to have rich eyes and poor hands. That is from William Shakespeare, As You Like It. Now, why do I quote that? Because I feel that the Western man has sold his birthright. He's dwelled in a world of pleasure and fantasy and titillation and sensations and self-gratifications, and he has lost his inheritance as to who he is and his identity and why is he here. And my friends know it did not start just yesterday. But I'm going to go back over a little bit of background material, and I believe that you'll find this is going to be one of my most exciting, interesting, proof positive, loaded with information tapes. If you want to shut the tape off briefly and go to Ezekiel, the 28th chapter. All right, the folks here have their Bible, so hopefully you do there. But I'm going to skip over a lot. I'm going to go through it very quickly and very briefly. And I think that you're going to find some really interesting things brought up to date that is going to shock you and horrify you and excite you. I think that a lot of people, in fact, I know a lot of people get very upset with me when I tell them that the flood was not worldwide. There has been many floods upon this earth, and at one time or other the whole earth was covered with water. But by perpetrating and perpetuating this erroneous tale, you see, the adversary loves it. Because, now if you want to call them the fallen extraterrestrials, the fallen angels, then they were wiped out at the flood. Don't you see, all of these descendants of these ancient evil ones can declare, you cannot blame us. They were all wiped out at the flood. And yet, many of them will try to trace their genealogy back beyond the flood. Well, where did they come from? So we have to use just a little bit of common sense. Let's go back to the 28th chapter of Ezekiel, and we talk about this mysterious king of Tyre. Now, your King James here is referred to as Tyrus, and it was also called Tyre and the king of Tyre. And I have heard many a preacher get up and pontificate on this and say, oh, this was Lucifer himself. Well, it doesn't say Lucifer. And we've already proved beyond the shadow of a doubt that Lucifer was a planet, not a man. And it was not in reality even a planet. I think we've documented that it was a great space station. Now, bear with me. We're going to bring out some more evidence by this. Do you know what Tyre means? It means a rock. How many times are those of you who attended Christian churches and in your early years you've sat there and sang, Rock of Ages, cleft to me. Let me hide myself in thee. Never having any idea what this Rock of Ages was. And then we became more confused, pardon me, when the Catholic Church, especially trying to find a credence and substantiate the reason for their existence, they try to tell us that Yeshua, the Christed one, he said to Peter, oh, Peter, up on this rock, and Peter comes from the word Petros, and all of that farce that they have perpetuated on us. But no, I think that we have explained quite well in chapters past about in the book of Daniel that this great rock that was not cut out with human hands, no man from this world made it into something that's cut out. Well, that was going to come and crush these evil nations because, you see, our Presidente Herr Bush of their New World Order, I tell you, if you went back and you read the book The Art of War by Sun Tzu, where before you attack a nation, you send in your agents and your assassins that destroy their major military officers, you destroy their major weapons, and you leave the people virtually defenseless. Well, they don't have to send one in. He's either the devil incarnate, or he's a stupid man. But here we are on the brink of world war, and all of the nations of the world are struggling. Monetarily, the whole world is down the toilet. It's bankrupt. And they're all turning to us, and our bankrupt, phony toilet paper money that has no gold or silver or anything behind it that you can redeem. And here we are, we're still being deceived, and by who? But behind it all, I think their purpose and the plan of the Almighty. But let's go back to this ancient king of Tyre. Tyre means the rock. And as I told you before, that all of these ancient peoples that even preceded the Semitic Adamic white man, Adam means to be of a red, ruddy complexion. They all of these other races and ancient peoples, yes, they preceded the Semitic man by tens, if not hundreds of thousands of years ago. But anyway, we go back to this mysterious king of Tyre. Now, Tyre means the rock, and I believe that he, being a stranger and a pilgrim and a cast out, an intergalactic vagabundo, as so many of them are, and he was exiled here to this earth. But also keep in mind, later you might want to go and read Matthew, the 13th chapter, I believe it is, and forgive me if I'm wrong, where Christ tells his disciples, the world is a field, and in the field I planted the sons of God. And also in the same field, he says, he says there was planted the seed of the adversary. Continuing on the premise of Genesis 3 and 15, that it was speaking of a peoples here that was to meet upon this planet, this sphere in the universe, and that there was to be perpetual hatred and animosity between the seed of the woman. See, Kave, life container, Eve, Mother Eve, and the cities of Eve, a type of people, and between the seed of the serpent. And we showed that not only was this an adopted emblem by many peoples here upon this earth who was impressed by these great flying ships as the Aztecs and the Toltecs and the ancient Mayans and the people of Peru described these as the Chinese, the great black ships of the yin and the yang, the great lord of space, and their black chariots that could spring up, coil up and spring up like a serpent that breathed fire. And we pointed out that dragons and serpents are synonymous. So keeping this in mind, where he's talking to the Son of Man, as he's referring to Ezekiel, actually in the ancient language he's talking to the son of Adam, a son. And he said, you go to this prince of Tyrus, thus said Yahweh God, because his heart is lifted up, and say to him, thou hast said, I am a God, and I sit in the sea, I sit in the seat of God in the midst of the seas. You see, allegorically, idiomatically, the great seas of space. And he said, he sits there. He's going to be the center. Now, let's, we go on down. You really want to read all of it. It talks about, with thy wisdom and with thy understanding, thou hast gotten thee riches. Riches. Now, I think that what you ought to do is take one of these yellow highliners and outline this and keep this in mind, because I'm going to prove a point with this. With thy riches thou hast gotten gold and silver into thy treasures. By thy wisdom and by thy traffic, that's the 5th verse, hast thou increased thy riches, and thy heart is lifted up because of thy riches. And we go on down, and we're trying to figure, where is he, what is he talking about? Where did this mysterious king of Tyre? Now, it said that, pardon me, he said he was just a prince. Did not say he was a king, so it shows that they, and we still are, if my premise is true, that these people still exist, we're in a whole lot more trouble than we've ever dreamed. But it talked about by his great wisdom. Actually, you look it up, his great knowledge. Knowledge and wisdom is not synonymous. I have known people that have great knowledge and have photographic memories where they can bring to the surface of their mind anything that they have retained and do it quite easily. I've always been very jealous of people like this. But most, in a lot of cases, they don't have the wisdom or the understanding or the common sense to use that knowledge that they have. But anyway, he goes on. You read the 7th verse. He talks about his beauty and his wisdom and talks saying, he shall defy thy brightness. Thou shalt be brought down to the pit. Thou shalt die the death of them that are slain in the midst of the seas. And those ancient days, people had more understanding they were referring to, and they all had knowledge of great extraterrestrial wars that we have pointed out in chapters past and so forth. But going to the 10th verse, it says, thou shalt die the death of the uncircumcised by the hand of strangers, for I have spoken it to thee, saith Yahweh God. Now, he's talking to a man that ruled Tyre, but he was only considered as a prince. I would say he was one of the great sons of Cain, or the great Khan of space, which I equate to Darth Vader. If you want a good example, watch these movies of Star Wars and so forth. Verse 11, moreover the word of Yahweh come unto me, saying, Son of Adam, take up a lamentation against the king of Tyrus, and say unto him, thus saith Yahweh God, that thou sealest up the sum full of wisdom and perfect in beauty. Thou hast, now listen to verse 13. Thou hast been in Eden, the garden of God. Now think about that. We pointed out all of these trees, which represented racial trees, family trees, represented populated planets that belong to and in the garden of, belonging to, pertaining to Eden, the great headquarters. Thou hast been in Eden, the garden of God. Now here is another analogy, an allegory that the Western man, and probably few, if any, in the world understand. Every precious stone was thy covering, the sardius, the topaz, the diamond, the beryl, the onyx, the jasper, the sapphire, the emerald, the carbuncle. And now listen again, once again, I don't know if you noticed, in the 4th verse there, he spoke of his gold and of his silver, and again, the gold is mentioned. He says, and the workmanship of thy tabrets and of thy pipes was prepared in thee in the day that thou wast created. Now, you see, I have known personally, and I used to preach this, if you'll forgive me, that the adversary, this fallen extraterrestrial being, that he was not a son of God like you and I want to think that we are. That, oh, he was just an angel. This was a second-class citizen of the universe who temporarily just had great powers over us. But after looking up the word and finding created in so many instances simply meant dispatched from to another place. All right? And now bear with me. This is going to prove out what I say is actually true. Thou art the anointed cherubim that covereth. In other words, watched over, hovered over, like a mother chick does her hen, see? And he says, and I have set thee so. Thou wast. In other words, past tense. In other words, hey, I remember back when you were a member of this renegade Air Force that mutinied or committed mutiny against us, tried to take us, the seed of God and the government, over, and that's why you were cast out. Thou wast upon the holy mountain. Holy. Now, so many people, I know that this is going to upset them, it's going to blow their bubble, but if they would stop and think for a second, what a lovely explanation I shall attempt to give. Holy is describing a source and a power of undefinable energy. I have been in, personally, in church meetings in many, many years, many decades gone by, where I felt the power and the energy of the Almighty fall upon me personally and other people, and I've seen it. Now, today, I see so many of them, I feel that they're simply trying to imitate it. But we will leave that alone. So we're talking about a mountain, and we proved mountains. Many times it refers to something very high up. And mount ships and mountains, and we proved that they're flying space stations in many instances, and so he's talking about a great, energetic, movable, transportable mountain, which I refer to. And bear with me, I'm going to show you some historical and archaeological evidence, even out of National Geographic here and all. Now he goes on, he says, well, let me start over. 14th verse. Thou art the anointed cherubim. Remember, Fenton says, Karub, that covered, see, protected, and I set thee so. Thou wast upon the holy mountain of God when thou walked up and down in the midst of the stones of fire. Now, you see, these stones here, in my present opinion, I may have to change. We talk about birthstones, and God, if I just had the time to get into the stones of the breastplate that the high priest wore, and you get into researching the ancient Israelites and to who they are, each tribe was allotted a birthstone. was assigned to and represented each of the 12 tribes. And so I do confess to you, there's a lot more here than I see and understand, and I would like to get into it, but I'm going to skip it. Verse 15, it says, Thou wast perfect in thy ways from the days that thou wast created, until iniquity was found in thee. Now verse 16, By the multitude of thy merchandise. Now get this, hey friends, this guy is not a spook. He's not an invisible boogeyman that goes around and slips in and out of you. I do not disagree that this personage and a lot of these ancient people, they knew of parallel universes. They knew how to take shortcuts through time and space travel and technology beyond anything that we probably have ever conceived or believed, or the concept even entered our mind. Because I equate us basically to primitive cavemen that we're just now trying to catch up, some of us, if there's anybody out there intelligent enough to listen. But, all right, let's see. Okay, where was I? I got carried away. That was perfect in the ways when I was created. 15, 16. By the multitude. Now get this. The spooks don't gather merchandise. Spooks do not need gold. They do not need silver. They do not need jewels. They do not need to enslave people. Maybe to inhabit them like a demonic spirit, if you want to believe that. But he goes on. His accusation is made against him, and I think when it talked about he walked up and down in the midst of the stones of fire, we took you back in the Fredericks Bible, made it quite clear when the Almighty asked this adversary. I don't believe it was exactly this same person, because this guy was only a prince. He wasn't a king. But go back, remind you once again of Fredericks Bible and the explanation and the wonderful translation of Job chapter 1 and chapter 2, where it talked about all of the sons of God. They were gathering in outer space at the house of the Almighty to report in, to receive orders, to have him check upon how they've been doing, talk things over, having a family reunion, so to speak. And it said also that the sons of God, among the sons of God, I mean to say, there was the adversary, and he went with him to the mount, to the very household, that time in great antiquity when Job says, I was there when all the morning stars sang together. And my friends, the word, the morning star, you find out it also is referring to the princes of God, those who inhabited the very headquarters of Eden, who Christ said in Revelations 22:16, he said, I am the bright and the morning star. But this adversary that was among him, he was questioned by the Eternal, and he said, Where hast thou been? He said, I've been flying to and fro over and landing on the earth. Well, your King James gives some sorry, stupid translation by the Dark Age translators that he was jumping up and down on it. Now, so apparently this great adversary, as we just got done describing to you here, that he trafficked throughout all of the planets and the galaxies and the universe. And I say to the scientists, I'm going to give you a little clue that you might not have thought of, but you can prove whether I'm out of my tree or not. I think you'll find something strange that you had not considered before and prove whether I'm right or wrong. Bear with me. I'll try to bring that up now. By the multitude, verse 16, of thy merchandise, they have filled the midst of thee with violence, and thou hast sinned. Therefore I will cast thee as profane out of the mountain of God. I will destroy thee, O thou covering cherubim, from the midst of the stones of fire. Now remember, he was a prince. He was one of the great captains of one of the great extraterrestrial fleets. He was probably one of the very princes, the very sons under his father, Baal or Baal or Balaam. And we're going to bring this out from archaeological evidence and from a very recent National Geographic, if you believe that or not. I'm going to bring you up to date as they bring us up to date. They wrote, they didn't see, they didn't understand in toto what they had read and what they saw on the walls of a great cave here in the Americas. Then he goes on in verse 17, thy heart was lifted up because of thy beauty. Thou was corrupted by thy wisdom. By reason of thy brightness I will cast thee to the ground. Now the ground, erats, remember, earth, ground, land, that area, world, globe. In other words, I will cast you down to this earth. Tartarus, as it was called in the ancient days of antiquity. I will lay thee before kings that they may behold thee. Now, you remember, you will see in times past, I believe this was fulfilled, that all of this was one of the great princes of Babylon who was inhabiting this great city that was named Tyre, or a rock from whence he came. Now, is there a connection between Ty and Tar? Pardon me, but like the Israelites, they named the new land and the new places in which they had inhabited against those in antiquity, lest they forget after through generations of knowledge and the wisdom of their ancestors and progenitors would fade away, as it has happened to this now Pepsi generation. Now, I'm not putting all young people down, and I don't blame all of the young people. I blame the people that raised them, and the people that raised them, and the people that raised them, that they strayed from the Almighty. They turned from the book. They turned from His wisdom and their knowledge, and like the old commercial mother, I'd rather do it myself. All right, now we're going to quit here, probably on verse 18. Thou hast defiled thy sanctuaries by the multitude of thy iniquities, by the iniquity of thy traffic. All right, so we'll just leave that alone for now. And let's go back and let's try to understand a little bit about I make myself little notes, and I forget what the notes are about. But not right at this time, but a little later on, we're going to go back from these symbols of Mu and Maya and so forth. I think that there is a great deal of knowledge to be gained. I believe beyond a shadow of a doubt, as my son-in-law, quite a few years ago, he came up with the idea. He wondered if a lot of the ancient letters of the alphabet and the names and the symbols of the Hebrew language, if they were not a computer language. Well, I kind of stored that in the back of my mind as a pretty wild premise, but after I look at some of these, especially these depictions of the, shall we call glyphics, of the Mu era, they look very much like computer symbols, like a lot of our international signs. So when the Chinese and the Russians march through our streets, they'll know where the deer cross, and they'll know where they're supposed to stop their tanks and cars. But I think a lot of these symbols, that's actually what they were. They were computer chips from things that primitive people actually saw within these extraterrestrial ships. But then where it gets childlike, you see that they went on and they copied down what they saw, but then they also, with their fertile, stimulated imagination by this time, they started to make some outlandish pictures, which the two of them thrown together does not compute, and it gets confusing. So I maintain that I'm going to prove here that Solomon met the people of Mu, met their progenitors, and he met the Mayan. And remember, Mu means Ma. And you got to keep in mind Kave, which means a life container, translated Eve in some cases. And so I believe I've covered that, and you've heard me speak now of the gold from the plains of Shinar. And you remember how the greedy Aztecs, the greedy Spaniards under Cortez and Pizarro and so forth, how they went down, they extracted literally tons of gold, a lot of which never got to Spain because it sank on the ships. But why was it here in this odd geographical location was there so much gold that they said that the Aztecs used it for sewer pipes and water pipes? It was not even esteemed of great value to those people. They just saw that it was something very pretty and they could make decorations out of. Where did it all come from? All right, now the scientific clue that I proposed or suggested to you, the scientists and mineralogists, so forth, they can take gold. And I've seen this myself. What you might do, go down to a coin dealer. And you walk in, you say, I would like to see a Canadian $20 gold piece, like the old double eagle of the United States. And I don't think it's legal to sell them anymore, the $20 gold piece from South Africa. But if you can get a hold three, put them side by side, where you'll see that, let me think now, the gold from Canada, if I may have this backwards, has a very coppery look to it. The gold of the old double eagle of North American issue, it was of a lighter gold. And then the South African gold is somewhere in between that. Now, I know you can take all three golds and you can mix them together. But I wonder, now I have seen, I was in 1969, I was in Bogota, Colombia, and what they called the Museo de Oro. That's the Museum of Gold in Bogota. And there were some very beautiful, ornate, intricate, mind-boggling gold things that were made by the ancient Indians. And a lot of these looked like they were spun gold. You saw no mold marks on them whatsoever. But what caused their decay and disappearance, I've even got recorded music of tribes of Indians that are now extinct already in my time. They were alive in my time, but now they're wiped out in toto. And a lot of them, I remember one tribe in particular there, it was a primitive tribe in 1969. They were all dwelling on a big lofty mountain there in the Andes, and they had a plague that was one that our scientists have conquered. And the people were dying off, and they were the last of this particular race or sub-race of peoples. And they sent in their doctors and scientists to examine them. And they said, look, to the chief, just let us help you, we can save them. They said, we don't want to be saved. They were so fearful they didn't even want to live in this new emerging world. They wanted to live out their way in the old ways and die there. But anyway, so much for that. But my point is, you remember, go back and look through your tapes, and I told you, and also I used the evidence of this 150-year-old, going back 150 years old, where this rabbi concurred the same thought that I did. And if you choose to believe me, I didn't even discover his evidence till I had already made the tape, and I had written the chapter a few years back. And then I came across later evidence and wrote it down. But as I said back then, and I believe, boy, I got some great proof, that you talk about all these people, and it gets confusing, but actually, folks, they're the same people. It's the same old game. The only thing that changes is the names of the players. You see what I mean? It's like a crooked card game. That's gone on since time immortal. The only thing that has changed is the names of the players, but they're the descendants of the same peoples. And so I told you these great seafaring people called the Phoenicians, the great traffickers in gold. Now, you see, Solomon, I have to correct some things that I said. I said Solomon was the wisest man that ever lived before or since Christ. Now, nobody compares with Christ, as I believe he was the God incarnate, but what I believe doesn't matter to most people. But the point is, he was the most knowledgeable man in this world. But this did not mean that he had wisdom. He asked for knowledge. He did not ask for wisdom. And there is a difference. For if he had truly had the wisdom to understand and apply the knowledge which was rendered unto him from the gods or the Elohim or the angels of the Most High, he would not have gone awry as he did. But so much for that. So what I'm building up to is a point here. Where did all of this gold come from? I just read it to you in Ezekiel 28, that when the great ships of the fallen cherubims, or the cherubiums of the Most High Yahweh, those who had guarded and been his personal entourage and guard of the very household of, once again, remember, the wounded bull, as there was a battle of such horrific proportion that even the very house of God was damaged by a rocket, or referred to by the ancients and Indians, and even today we find it in astronomy, and the dumb Western white man, he's not going to say, yes, that makes sense, until it's popular and everybody accepts it. You see, everybody wants to be an individualist, like back in the 50s and the 60s. They all want to wear the same tennis shoes, the same earring in the same ear, the same length of long hair, and the same sloppy old jeans. Wow, man, I'm an individualist. I'm like all the other individualists that number into the millions in this world. Well, anyway, forgive me, I'm going to stay off those tangents. So, where did this gold come from? I say that all of this gold that was brought to Solomon, and why was gold so esteemed by him? You've got to remember that he was the richest man in the world, and he had his thousands of chariots. He had the wheels covered with gold, and all of this and that. You talk about ostentatious, and you talk about vanity, and you talk about wealth beyond the scope of your mortal imagination. Well, he had it. Why? Why? Because it was a payoff by these Phoenicians, these Mayans, these Edomites, these Canaanites, the very same ones, that the very same descendants of those who vexed Solomon's forefathers and progenitors back to Adam. He had this knowledge, but he did not have the brains to apply it. All right. So, Tyre, as I say, is a rock. Christ said he was the rock. But whoever built this ancient city of Tyre, they named it the Rock. Now, let me refresh your memory with something terribly exciting, least to me. Remember Lake Titicaca and the Andes, way up in the Andes. We're talking about a lake in the mountains. They said it's a sacred lake. Has great juju connected with it, with the Indians of that area. And we explained to you the name Titicaca meant holy rock. And we find in our Bible, we just described it, we talked about the holy rock, the holy mountain, the holy house. But rock, Chinese, the Babylonians, the Egyptians, referred to planets as rocks, the holy rocks. So Lake Titicaca held in remembrance. Something utterly fantastic, mind-boggling went on when probably a great extraterrestrial ship, probably accompanied by a great fleet of ships, that hovered over this area for a great long time, and they stood there and they knew the locations of these Enosh earthmen, because the Bible tells us, now keep this in mind, you got to find out who you are, brother, because the Almighty says, I gave you the heathen for an inheritance. See, they are the cheapest work-saving devices ever created by man. Machines or robots cannot outdo that. And these ancient peoples and these ancient Chinese that go back for probably billions of years, they are very happy to live a peaceful life and to grow crops. They are good at it. They're among the best in the world. And they're a patient, serious, easy-going people until, of course, their warlords and their leaders go in and excite them to a frenzy. But I have a picture in my mind of these great fallen extraterrestrial ships of the adversary with their cargo holds full of glistening gewgaws and baubles and things of beauty. And they hovered there until probably tens of thousands, if not millions, of these pre-Adamic ancient peoples gathered for these ships as they landed, and these sky men descended and held these people, held them in awe, and they took control of them and their lives and their agriculture and their future, and they taught them science, and they taught them agriculture, and then Cain-Abel-ism. Now, do you remember why Cain was kicked out? His sacrifice was not acceptable to the Almighty. He refused to offer the blood sacrifice. We're talking about this Cain, allegorical person here. These people, they refused the blood sacrifice to show that there had been those fleets of fallen extraterrestrial angels that had literally come into the house of God, and they saw the daughters of men, and they thought them beautiful and said, let us go in unto them. So there was a contamination, there was a pollution of the blood, without arguing where it was, whether it was on this earth or in other worlds. So they, because of this sin, taking of trees that was beautiful unto the sight and to be desired. Hey, I tell you what, I've got some pretty excited, had some pretty excited thoughts in my young days, you know, when I was coming into manhood, when I saw beautiful blondes and redheads and brunettes. But I have never seen a tree that got me aroused or excited. I'm not trying to be vulgar, I'm trying to get you to think. And so because of this sin, because it was not the cities, the planets of the Adon that fell, but it was Eve, Kaveh. So it gives us a hint, a clue, if my premise is right, where all of this took place, and they and their cohorts, they were cast out. And have I not taken you to Revelations and shown you there where it says nothing defiled or degenerate shall ever again enter into the house of the Almighty, this great space station that speaks about all of the nations of God when they take their glory back into it? Well, so the Tyre, meaning rock, it was the principal Phoenician seaport, and it was situated about 32 miles. And for those of you, I will put this in, that live that write to me from Canada and the other Australia and Finland and so forth, I will also give it in kilometers. So 52 kilometers north of Mount Carmel, 22 miles or 35 kilometers south of Sidon, Tyre was known as for its great antiquity. Now, for confirmation of this, I won't do it. I'll just quote it to you. You take Isaiah 23, 1 to 7. It was just as it was founded as a colony, or when it was founded as a colony by the Sidonians, is not known. See, now there's another mysterious name. Who were the Sidonians? And were they a Canaanite, Phoenician people? Now, I believe at this time, before I get carried away and pontificating, we would ask you, please turn your tape over to side 2, and we will continue. We are on side 2. We're off and running. Now, you see, before this place was called Tyre, it was known for its great antiquity, as I said, Isaiah 23, 1 to 7. But just as it was founded as a colony by the Zidonians, or when it was, it is not known. It was first mentioned, pardon me, after the conquest of the Promised Land in the era about 1467 BC. And remember, back then it was a fortified city. This mention of Tyre was in connection with the boundaries of Asher's tribal territory from the start, and all through its history. Tyre apparently remained outside of Israel's borders as an independent neighbor. You can find confirmation of this in Joshua 19th chapter, 24 to 29, and also 2 Samuel's 24 and 7. But, you see, once again, this is where the students of the Bible, they become very confused, and people will not take the effort to look these things up. And I say, 'tis still our ancient foe. Now, Zidon, the Zidonians, they were the Canaanites. They were Canaan's firstborn son, Zidon. He was the progenitor of the Zidonians, the seaport town of Zidon. It was named after their forefather, and for many years it was the principal city of the Phoenicians, as the Greeks called the Sidonians. Today the city is called and known as Zaida, S-A-I-D-A. But anyway, let me get back to calling it Tyre from this era that we're speaking of. Got to have a little shot of coffee here from my throat. Now, here's where Israel and Solomon and so forth, they got into trouble. Let me give you a little background, so then when I bring you up to date in archaeological evidence, showing how these adversaries of the Almighty and the children of God's Israel, the descendants of Adam, of the Semitic people, and how their adversaries, they've got us surrounded all over the world. Now, you go back to those ancient days there that I just quoted, the different chapters there, we find that there was friendly relationships existed at times. Now, at times, not all the time, I got to make that quite clear, between Israel and Tyre. Now, notably during the reigns of David and Solomon, we find that they were skilled Tyranian workmen. They engaged in building. Now, get this: they helped build David's royal palace with the cedar timbers that were sent by this Hiram. Now, he was the king of Tyre at that time. If you confirmation that, read 2 Samuel 5:11, read 1 Chronicles 14 and 1. The Tyrans also supplied David with cedar, later used in the temple construction. 1 Corinthians 22, 1 to 4. I apologize, something didn't sound right there. 1 Chronicles, I meant to say. Now we find that after King David's death, King Hiram of Tyre, he furnished Solomon materials and assistance for the construction of the temple and other government building. Evidence of this in 1 Kings 5th chapter 1 to 10, 7, 1 to 8, and 2 Chronicles 2, 3 to 14. Now, it says that a half-Israelite son of a Tyrian worker in copper, who himself was a skilled craftsman, was also employed in the construction of the temple. 1 Kings 7 and 13 and verses 14, 2 Chronicles 2, 13 and 14. Now, for their assistance there, the Tyrians were paid with wheat and barley and oil and wine. All right, more evidence in 1 Kings 5, 11 and 12, 2 Chronicles 2, 15. Now, in addition, Solomon gave the king of Tyre 20 cities. Though the Tyrian monarch was not overly pleased with the gift, as you read in 1 Kings 9th chapter 10 to 13. Now, you see, here, we're going to see, and I'm going to explain to you in a second, these people are diametrically opposed to the Yahweh God of Israel as north is to the south, and here, this wise, this man who retained knowledge, knowledge. He didn't have wisdom, though. Here he is giving his enemies and the enemies of God 20 cities, and like a typical Edomite, he's not happy about it. He wants more. There's no satisfying them. Now we find Tyre in time became one of the great sea powers of the ancient world. We find that her mariners and commercial fleets of Tarshish ships were famous for their voyages to faraway places. Now, I wish that I had time to go into this, but I don't. But I'm going to touch lightly on it. There is a lot of history missing there. But there's a lot that we could talk about, because most folks are not aware that the man who went to claim the body of Christ was his uncle Joseph. Not his stepfather, but his uncle Joseph of Arimathea. And he owned the tin mines, they say, of Cornwall, and he owned the ships of Tarshish. Apparently, here was an Israelite man of God who came along, and now he was, this is why he was able to claim the body of Christ. He was one of the wealthiest men of the world, and he had great political influence, and peoples and nations behind him, not just to mention God Almighty, and so they were afraid to refuse him. And it was in his very tomb that the Christ was buried. Now, over there, for everything that's real, there's a false. There's two different tombs over there, lauded as the tomb of Christ. You might go look at both of them. But the one that you can tell was a true tomb of Christ, where the track rolls back and forth. This friend of mine, who was an archaeologist, I think some of you have got his books, E. Raymond Capp of Thousand Oaks, California. He's written quite a number of awesome books. But he tells about the tomb. Now, see, they cut the tomb of Christ out of a great big solid rock. It was cut out for Joseph of Arimathea. But in this tomb, you see finely chiseled marks. It's like a sunken bathtub inside, and then up in each corner of the room, there's holes where the birds can go in and out and feed on the dead bodies. And then when, after a period of so many months or years, the bones are picked clean, they're taken out of this tomb, and they're buried in a field. Because it was prophesied that the Christ, the Messiah, would be buried in a new tomb, never used by another man. So, you can see where at the last minute they had to go in and they had to chisel it out with a big, crude chisel, which the chisel marks do not match up with the rest of the tomb. So you want to see how tall he was and so forth? You can tell. Maybe they'll let you measure it. I'm sure the guides there will tell you if you're silly enough to want to go over there at this time.
Personally, I would not. The only thing that holds me back is fear of better judgment, lack of equipment, money, will to do so, don't pack the gear, and I'm a coward. Now, let's see. Tyre in those times, I believe I've said this to you, that they were a great sea power in the ancient world, and her mariners and commercial fleets of Tarshish ships were famous for their voyages, as I said, to faraway places. And the king of Tyre and Solomon, they cooperated. Hey, detente, have I got a deal for you? They cooperated in a joint shipping venture for the importing of the gold of Ophir and other precious things. Keep this in mind. Look this up. 1 Kings 9:26 to 28, 10:11 to 22, and 2 Chronicles 9:21. Now we find in all of the dealings of the Tyranians that they had with Israel, there was no indication as to who the people were, as to the fact that the people were interested in worshiping the Yahweh, and their association was merely for a commercial value. Racially, they were Canaanites, and religiously, they practiced Baal worship. Their chief deities, and they had several of them, were Melkart, Melkart, and Astarte, also known as Ashtaroth. Now, you remember, I think we've, in days past, we spoke of that old Jezebel, who was the daughter of Ethbaal, or Ethbaal. You see, claiming very descent to the devil, the adversary himself, that Moses said, choose you this day who you will serve. If Baal or Baal be God, you serve him, and if Yahweh be God, you serve him. Because there is two roads that is laid before you. One leads to death and destruction, and this is where 90% of the world is headed today. In this hour when they're crying peace and safety, and Mr. Bush is disarming God's people as quick as they can, because I can understand that, and it doesn't worry me, because he's taken away our arm of strength away from us. And the Scripture quite plainly says the final battle is His, God Almighty. He will defend us with His great armies. But here we had this old Jezebel, who was the daughter of Ethbaal, who was the king of the Sidonians, including Tyre. At the time, Jezebel married Ahab, the king of the northern kingdom of Israel. Now, Jezebel, to say the least, she was infamous in her determination to blot out the worship of Yahweh. If you don't think so, you go back to 1 Kings, 16th chapter, verses 29 to 31, and read the 18th chapter, verse 4, 13 and 19th verses. Now, talk about being condemned of the Almighty God. It was, however, for the personal wickedness of Jezebel and her daughter, let's see, what was her name? Athaliah, I believe, that Tyre came under such heavy divine condemnation. Now, folks, you can go so far, and if people around you don't get you, God Almighty will come down after you. Now Tyre grew to be very great at the expense of all the people, including Israel. You see, these parasites. It's always God's people that create the money and the power. Then they let it slip right through their fingers. They let all their heavenly Father's enemies and their enemies come over and take their toys and gewgaws and baubles and precious possessions and inheritance, and they cast it to dogs. They let the enemies of God have it. How I weep for the stupidity of our people, both past and present. Now Tyre, as I said, grew to be very great at the expense of other peoples, including dumb Israel. She was a manufacturer of metal objects. What did it say about Cain and some of those, and Tubal-Cain, who was an artificer in brass? Well, anyway, they manufactured metal objects, glassware, purple dyes. They became a great trading center for the overland caravans and a great import-export depot. Along with the industrial and the commercial growth came riches and conceit and pride. And her merchants and her tradesmen boasted of being princes and honorable ones of the earth. You think that's not so? You go back and you read Isaiah 23 and 8, and we find in time that Tyre also developed an attitude of opposition. See, when she got her strength and she got her power, she got enough money to stand up and say, yes, I'm a prince, I'm a king, I'm this, I'm that. You know, that's the golden rule. If you got the gold, you can rule. Might is right. And like Napoleon said, God is on the side of he that has the biggest cannon. Now, I don't believe that, but men believe that, and they have practiced that since time immemorial. So here they are. Hey, they got all the marbles. Now they developed this lousy attitude towards the Almighty, and they conspired with all of the neighboring nations against God's people. The only thing we learn from history is that we don't learn. Now you read Psalms 83 and 2 and verse 2 to 8, and it says, so it was her bold defiance of the Almighty Yahweh that eventually brought down the city and the adverse judgment, downfall, and destruction. And it goes back, and this is why I went back to the Bible and talked about these people, but they weren't all destroyed. They scattered throughout the whole earth. And we're going to track them down like a bunch of hound dogs and show that they were never wiped out. They weren't wiped out then. They weren't wiped out by the flood. They're still around. So we find in the latter part of the 9th century B.C. that Yahweh took note on the city's arrogant attitude, and he therefore warned her that she would be paid back in kind for robbing his people of gold and silver and the many desirable things used to beautify her temples. Remember, he said he was a jealous God, and also that there would be an accounting for Tyre's having sold God's people into slavery. And haven't we gone in the very last chapters you go into Revelations, the 18th chapter, and it talks about today in this mystery Babylon, and it tries to tell us who she is, but these blind, pasteurized pastors, these damnable pimps, these coins for Christ, gutless wonders that they call preachers, these pablin, puking punks, they don't even know who God Almighty is talking about there, because He's closed their eyes. He's put a curse on them. He's made them blind. I tell you what, there's a day coming when the Almighty prophesied that these people would be going around and saying, weren't you a preacher? And they said, oh no, I've been a husbandman or a farmer all of my life, depending upon the translation. And they're going to look at his hands, and by God, if there's no calluses on there, they're going to run him through with a dart. In fact, if you want to get your concordance out and you look it up, I won't take the time because I've strayed off my subject just a tad here. But he said in that day they would take a dart and they would run them through. The mothers and fathers that bore some of these sorry-ass preachers. I can get away with that because I say sorry-ass because they bray like a jackass in a pepper patch. But anyway, so you go back and you read the account for Tyre having sold God's people into slavery. Oh, I didn't bring out my point in Revelation's 18th chapter. It lists all of the different things that this mystery Babylon of our day and our hour that they esteem. And one of the last things that's mentioned, they esteem the least, is the souls of men. In other words, men's lives are not worth a damn. Just like your Presidente. And my friends, it ain't over till it's over. And I'm going to tell you what. God is going to use the Muslim world. He's going to use the Mongolians. He's going to use the Chinese to get our attention before this show is over, and it's not that far off that this once great and mighty nation shall be invaded from without, and it'll be God's blessing that will bring about a house cleaning in our nation. What's the point of reading about all of these extraterrestrials and the mighty men of the Almighty? And as we understand, the main purpose was the message that they brought in, not what model vehicle they were flying, whether it was a Darth Vader special or a Star Trekkie shippy. It's time for the dumb people to wake up and smell the coffee. And so it tells about God's people sold in slavery. Go look it up in Joel 3rd chapter 4 to 8 and Amos 1 9 to 10. So you see, there's nothing new under the sun. So later on we get to the prophet Isaiah. He recorded a further pronouncement against Tyre, which indicated that she would be forgotten for 70 years. And Isaiah 23 1 to 18. Years thereafter, we find that the prophet Jeremiah included Tyre among those nations that were singled out to drink the wine of Yahweh's rage. Jeremiah 25th chapter, verses 8 to 17, 22, and then chapter 27 and verse 27. Chapter 27, read verses 2 and 7. And also 47, 2 and 4. There's some interesting reading there. There's some thought-provoking things. If you want to trace this all the way through and you want to find some evidence to try to disprove what I'm saying. So we find as the nations, as mentioned in the prophecies of Jeremiah, they were to serve the king of Babylon. So they served him for a period of 70 years. Jeremiah 25, verses 8 to 11. This suggests also both the prophecy of Isaiah and that of Jeremiah related to the Nebuchadnezzar campaign that was against Tyre. Also, now we're going to deal with this, matter of fact, God willing, if we have enough time. I think in this crucial hour, I've had people talk to me and write to me, and they say, is there anybody around that understands prophecy and what's going to happen next? Well, if the Almighty allows me to, we're going to get into the prophecies of Ezekiel, the 28th chapter, 29, quite a number of others, and dealing with the kingdom age or the kingdom or the government of the Almighty here upon this earth, and the valley of the shadow that we're going to have to walk through, and who is truly the enemies of the Most High, and how can we find out how accurate this is and how dependable these prophecies. And I have great ambition of covering the whole book of Revelation and going through it. I spent quite a bit of time researching it. I have another elderly friend that I esteem greatly, who spent 50 years of his life, well, let's see, from 1933 up until the 80s, he researched into prophecy. I had more than one friend that I esteem them as great scholars. And they were not people who did any compromising on the way to their horizon. But we will cover that a lot more in greater detail. And although now Ezekiel, as I think I've told some of you folks before, that he was a contemporary of Jeremiah, and Yahweh pointed to a calamity for Tyre at the hands of Nebuchadnezzar, and Ezekiel, a matter of fact, in chapter 26, verses 1 to 28 and 19, though Tyre had been like a pretty ship, that was equated to a pretty ship with multicolored sails and decks covered with a prow that was inlaid with ivory, she would sink in the open sea. Ezekiel 27, 3 to 36. And Tyre's king apparently, and we know for a fact, the line of Tyrian rulers, and a Canaanite, Edomite, people that were in ancient times known as Mu, known as Edom, the people from the Red Planet. Later on, in the Americas, they were known as the people of Mu. They were and also Indians throughout the world. A brilliant, mighty, world-encompassing empire that was to be reckoned with. But through deceit and secrecy,
on our last tape, telling you that we were going to prove beyond the shadow of a doubt that the ancient people of Mu and Maya, or the Mayans, these so-called mysterious people that we've heard all of these historians and archaeologists with their rhetoric, who were these mysterious people? And I say, yes, they were people who were descendants of those who came from beyond the stars, the descendants of the intergalactic Simon Legrees that we discussed, that Ezekiel made it quite plain who they were and why they were here and where they were kicked out of, and the judgment upon them and their different tentacles that reached not only throughout the world, as like the ancient Chinese scribe said, to the 9 lands, but these tentacles reach through history and time and space, and you cut one off and they're very mysteriously, they grow back another head. And all of this has been tried to have been covered up by those who have come in and polluted and distorted histories. As Napoleon said, history is a set of lies that are agreed upon. Upon who? The winners, those who write the history books. And you can see as you go back and you read the history of China and the way it's written. I have a series of books that my son-in-law gave me to add to my very fine library for cross-reference and so forth. And you can see the whole different attitude and the way it's changed and the truth, how it's been covered up just since the 30s. So, as we go back through time and antiquity and we uncover and we find out that these people didn't suddenly, mysteriously just appear in the Americas, but they had been on the earth for millenniums. All right, let's go back, and we are dealing with page 22 from the National Geographic of August 1981. And it's showing that in this great cave that they had discovered in Guatemala, it's located right in a corner there between Mexico, Honduras, and El Salvador. All right, now they go back and they tell us about this great cave. It was explored, first explored around 1980. And it was discovered by Naya Tunic, stone house or cave in local Mopan. Now you remember what I said about Yapan, Pan, goat, God? Mopan Maya dialect forks near where the first artworks were found in the Passage of Rights, as they called it. Throughout the cave, they had all these prominent glyphs and figures. But to keep this short and brief, I'll jump ahead here. They talk about in the mid-8th century A.D., in the peak of the classic Maya culture, as they called it, great temples arose and large cities thrived in the now sparsely populated lowlands of northern Guatemala. Now, having spent over 2 years of my life through Central and South America, and having spoke to other men and read their reports, there is literally hundreds and hundreds, probably if not thousands, of sites of the jungles of Central and South America with great artifacts and edifices that are yet to astound and to be discovered by man. But here is an interesting thing. On page 224 and 225, they show this long, winding cave, and they give the length of it and so forth. And what amazes me, why did these ancient Mayans go into these caves? Now we're talking about hundreds and hundreds of yards back in there, and it was just as dark as could be. And so, if indeed they just had primitive torches, but yet it seems that through discoveries of a lot of these ancient ruins, they actually had torches like our modern day flashlights. They, all you have to do is search the libraries of these strange phenomena and stuff like von Daniken and others. All right, so he made some mistakes and he exaggerated somewhat, but he created a whole flurry of other people who looked into these ancient records and said, maybe the old boy's got something and there might be some evidence. And I've read in different books of television sets, and I think we've pointed out, even back in the days of Moses, that through intergalactic communication of this great Lord that sent his messenger to Moses, said, I want to have a talk with you. And he appeared on a TV screen where they could verbally speak to each other. And this convinced this Moses, because this great extraterrestrial Lord seemed to know him and know all about him, and he called him by name. So maybe, all right, if you want to go along, this is just a primitive bunch of stupid heathens that went in there with torches and drew little diagrams and pretty pictures on the wall. But I think that as you go back and you read Numbers 25 of your Bible, and it tells of the children of Israel that they were in Shittim and they were messing with the daughters of Moab, which was a real no-no, and they were doing it out among the trees and so forth. So God Almighty couldn't see the hanky-panky or the kinky rituals that were going on. But, so I imagine that these devils that had gone in here, they were up to some sort of devilment. Were they performing sex rituals in there? What all was going on? If my premise is true and correct, and I'm going to prove it here in a second, that these were the descendants of Cain and Edom and these ancient people who the whole basis of their religious thought was phallic worship, sexual worship. Everybody attends that. You don't have to give out Bibles and pay prize money to the little kiddies for coming to church, because these people had something kinky to look forward to. This is what their whole mind centered around. All right, so we go here, and on this map of these caves, it shows to west terminus, the hall. Now get this, the hall of Balaam, named for the glyph, interpreted as jaguar. Now, how many times have I said that the great Cain was also known as the great hunter? He was also called the leopard king. He was described by the ancient indigenous people of ancient Americas as the jaguar king, as the leopard king. They used him to something that people were could equate with and identify and refer to glorify this man from space. But right there, Balaam, the word Balaam comes out. Like Solomon said, choose this day whom you will serve. So, once again we find and we realized here that we're faced with what was once a great enigma. And I believe that it is cleared up quite clearly here. We go into the further down the passage here. They say, passage of rites, the artist at right, he paints a figure holding a bloodletting instrument, as on page 235 to his left, and other works of a wide pillar that displays 20 figures and 12 texts. Here a ball player and a figure with a conch
Now it's something about a conch shell are found. And 4 sexually explicit figures. Now they go on, and you might go back and get the article, and you can see why and how that they taken their experts in there, and they were able to date it. Now I would like to go into all of it, but I find very, very mysterious here, and then it triggered me when I read they were wondering why was he holding this conch shell. But then I noticed the man had sort of a waistcoat that came up under his armpits, and it was funny how it stuck out in back, and then it reminded me of the pictures in many of the ancient hieroglyphics, and also you'll find them in the ancient Chaldean account of Genesis, where it shows the god Dagon or Dogon. And if you look through the historical records, he had a coat that looked like a fish's tail coming out. And we have Dagon, Dogon, and then we have Neptune. These great gods of the sea. I think they're also speaking of the sea of space. And there's some other things that we're probably missing. And so when they said here the conch shell, because, you know, the ancient, the peoples of Hawaii and of the islands down there, that shell meant something to them, and they used to call the people together with it, as did the ancient Hebrews and Israelites with the ram's horn. And so with these two things, I believe it showed that they were worshiping and held up Dagon and the whole family of God, shall we say. Like you see some of these Catholic families that have the whole Holy Family represented in plastic there on their dashboard, and so they feel safe and secure until the cop stops them. Anyway, so on page 233, they go on, they speak of the webs of mythical meaning. It says, surrounded many of the figures, a conch shell laying before a seated figure on the facing page, carries association with the sea, often a metaphor for the underworld, and the sun daily dies and is reborn. Shells, however, are also linked ritually to caves. But so it was here that then I noticed this peculiar jacket on the man that to me represented, then I realized Dagon, Dogon. But then they go on, they say the shells, let's see, and also another reason they went into the caves, they say fresh water is found, thus embodying the Mayan life, death symbolism. But the water here inside, was this not representative to them of the lower world of Neptune, or of these sea creatures, of the Dagons that could go and submerge their ships under the water and live without dying? But then they go on, they say they show a ball player here with a straw hat, torso armor, jaguar skin. Once again, the jaguar, many of these heathen have forgotten why and what it represents. But once again, Cain was called the leopard king, the jaguar king, and so forth. And then they go on, they talk about the legendary ball games pitted men and gods in contests involving death and rebirth, and imbuing the sport with religious connotation, they go on to say. And so then on page 234, behind, shows these great two columns. They have the inscription is a chamber we call the Hall of Balaam. For one of its 67 hieroglyphs may be the word Maya, for jaguar, like the other text in Nayatunic, etc. We'll skip all the phonetics and so forth.
And then they go down here, getting to know the ancient scribes. They say more ritual than sport. The ball games gave the ancient Mesoamerica one of its great distinctions. Played in a stone court with a hard rubber ball, the game provided arena, both real and mythical, in which the gods, in which kings played kings, and kings played gods, and gods played gods, and the losers were sometimes sacrificed. The lore of the ball game is permitted with celestial pontiffs and ancient tales. Now get this, this is so fantastic. This puts the capstone on all of it. The lore of the ball games is permeated with celestial motifs, ancient tales of the sun, the moon, and the planet Venus. What have I said all along? All of the different Indians that described and talked about Quetzalcoatl, the man from Venus, he who came in the feathered dragon ships, the fiery ships of Venus, to this earth, and over and over and over. But here it is, right here. But you think National Geographic is going to go back and listen to all these tapes and read my research? Because this is so far out, sounds so kooky. It's because of its simplicity, it's so hard to fathom that if Christ doesn't hurry up and get back, I'll be dead and gone, forgotten about, and then there'll be some genius on the horizon. It'll come forward and they say, "My, wasn't he a brilliant young man?" Now they go on to say on the same page 234, the first to be called the Passage of Rites bore several sexual scenes, and once again they come out with this air, seldom found in Maya art. Whether or not their creators intended it, the depictions possesses a powerful shock effect. Now, they also go on, I see another connection here on page 235 under the picture of a seated would-be god whose nose seems to start somewhere in the middle of his forehead and come down. To nourish the gods, human blood was drawn, sometimes by piercing the penis with a stingray spine or obsidian lancet. A figure holding a bloodletting instrument above may be preparing for the ritual. The meaning of this and other Naja tunic paintings may never fully be known, but the newly discovered artwork threatens by time, erosion, and man's wanting to steal it and all that. But when you start sticking pins through your penis, I would call that some sort of weird, sick, phallic worship. And so, in one breath, they tell the truth, and the next breath, they want to let them off the hook, but I don't. But keep that in mind. Depicted, the wars between men and gods from Venus. Is it all just coincidental? No, my friends. The point that I think is so fantastic is that, a lot of people say, well, gee, I read the books of Mu, and I've read a lot of these things, but I asked him, I said, did you truly understand what you read? My God, I've got tons and tons of evidence of the Mu and the Mayan peoples and how one corroborates the other. And I think I left off too lightly on that one point. You see, we read, but do we understand what we read in light of the comparison, the interlocking and overlapping of these other civilizations that are called by a different name? Now, let's see. I want to look this up again here and read this and bring out a point that I think that we will want to keep in mind Let's see. All right, on page 234, the lore of the ball game is permeated with celestial motifs, ancient tales. Now get this, I wish they had given us more on this. Why didn't they? Because they didn't know what they had. They didn't know what they were reading here. The ancient tales of the sun, the moon, and the planet Venus. I think for those of you, I know that a lot of you, we've given mental indigestion. And believe me, my friends, I may be just sitting here talking to myself. Because the farther down the road I get, the more business drops off, the more people drops off. Because people have never heard this before. It's too heavy duty. I had one fellow that I esteemed and cared a lot about. I still do. Consider him a friend, a man of God. But he said, people aren't going to go for that. It's too heavy. It's too intelligent for them. It's too hard to understand. Well, I have tried with the best of my ability to make this as simple as can be. But you see, as we get back to the people of Mu and their hieroglyphics they left, and we compare this with them, and all of the different things from Central and South America and all over the world, we know and understand that Cain declared himself the sun god. In other words, all of the farmers and all of the natives, whether black, white, yellow, red, everybody knows that without the sun, we would not have the energy, we would not have the light to see, we would not have the energy to grow plants and trees and grass and men and children and animals, and we all need the vitamins and the nutrients and the things that we derive from the sun itself. So he equated himself as to the sun god, as did the ancient Egyptians equated the powerful god Ra. Ra, the sun god. The very same guy, Cain, the great Khan, the great Baal, he who sits in the place of God, who is diametrically opposed to the Yahweh God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Also called the great hunter, and he who steps down upon the moon. I maintain and say that there was colonies upon the moon. I think we brought out evidence in past tapes of this. But he also had to show, as all of the ancient cultures and civilizations knew, that within this galaxy, that life came from the life container Kaveh, Eve, the great celestial city. And so the great Khan, or Cain, had to declare, deify, and uphold the mother and who he claimed to be his father, Adam, that he was descendant of these people. But he could not offer up the blood sacrifice because it would show that he was, as 1 John of the New Testament says, not as Cain, who was that wicked one. Revelation 12th chapter, wasn't it? The wicked one, that old Satan, the old devil, the enchanter, etc. We know all the names. This was not referring to Adam. Adam was not, and I repeat, not. Trace it through Genesis yourself. Adam Cain's son was declared as Seth. And we went through this, how the Egyptians, those of the Canaanite or the Edomite persuasion, or the very descent of them, who worshipped Horus, the god in the flying shield, who had the eye in the sky, who fought against, as they described in the Book of the Dead, the evil Seth, the descendant of the Adam kind, the Adon. So if Cain were to offer that blood sacrifice, which was acknowledging before the Creator of all the universes, sidereal systems and galaxies, saying, yes, I know that I am ill-conceived, I'm an illegitimate bastard, or mamzar, or mumser. Yes, I will offer up the blood sacrifice, recognizing that fact that I'm the result of an illicit, forbidden copulation between two peoples that you had forbidden. Yes, my father was of the tree of knowledge of good and evil that was desirable to the eye in the sight of my mother, descendants of the Evite people and the Adamite people, and we were not to take of, eat of, to lie with, conceive. If you look this up in your concordance, all of it represented a copulation. Yes, I know that I've probably got you somewhat sidetracked upon this issue, but something that I won't take time to do it at this time, but to keep in mind, I don't think that anybody has really ever straightened this out, that they caused a deep sleep to come over the Adam kind, and they would have us to believe that the Eternal applied some sort of anesthesiology here and put him into a deep sleep so that he might perform a operation and take a rib out. Now, in this modern day, putting all of our prejudice and religious opinions that does not compute with honest science, because by now anybody with an ounce of intelligence knows that our Heavenly Father is not a magician, but he is a scientist, and he follows scientific laws. Those we don't understand because we haven't caught up with them. They're beyond our comprehension because we have no background or anything to compare with or to gain understanding at this time in many areas. But if you look up the word rib, now for a long period of time, what I figured, and I understood that he took Isha out of Ish. And Ish merely means a male. That does not always have to be applicable to the Semitic or the, the Adamic man. But there was a lot of other things that did not compute. Well, if you go back and use your Strong's Concordance, for one, to keep it simple and make it simple for most of you that are listening, because many people have spent their money on something besides library books and great collections. They have families to take care of and other needs. But I would say that you look up the word rib, it means like an arched doorway or like a beam, something to this effect. And I would remind you once again that Adam, the house of Adam, the house of the heights. Go back and review some of the old tapes, and especially John, who was supposedly deserted and stranded by God and allowed to be, as a reward for all of his faithfulness, to be shut away on the Isle of Patmos. But this could be the greatest gift to us, is when the Almighty shuts us away from our fellow man and his influence, that we might become friendly and acquainted with him and look at things from his angle. Well, anyway, he showed John the 3 doors on the north, 3 on the south, 3 on the east, 3 on the west. And so they would be round, they would be curved, they would be archways. And so when it says he took Eve out of Adam, well, let's see. We go back and we study the book of Job. And we find in there, as I told you, the allegory of Job, who interpreted in many places, it was not speaking of a singular man. It's an idiom, it's a parable that most of the uninitiated will not take the time nor the effort to consider and listen to the reason and search out and make great, fabulous, mind-boggling, exciting discoveries. I have only touched the tip of the iceberg of this fabulous, lovely book. But Job being the Jashub Halem, he spoke of his wife, his 7 daughters, and 3 sons. That's 12, and counting himself. And he spoke of the sons going to the various daughters' houses. In my Father's house there are many mansions. And we looked that up, and we found that it was habitable places of abode. So then you see the great Khan, Darth Vader of that era, shall we say. He was the one from the tree of knowledge of good and evil, the planet, that the Adamites were forbidden to go to. But they did. And the same instance, they went to other planets and they took out of, or shall we say, out of the Adam colony, or let's call Adam America, better yet, let's call it England. Adam, we'll change the name to England. So out of Adam came some colonizers that went to the New World, and then it was called Eve, which came out of Adam. Only in this case we call it America. We call it the New Jerusalem. You find words in the Hebrew, I can't call it to mind right now, but it means colonizers. So not only have we ever expanded throughout the universe, fulfilling and will, and yet to, even as gloomy as it seems, he's going to save out a small proportion of select seed that he said that will copulate, we will reproduce, go forth and replenish not only this earth but other earths. And he said when he left the last time, I go now to prepare a place for you also. So keep that in mind. And do not let some of these little things that we deal with here on this mere little realm of this country and this world, but there's greater horizons to look forward to, great things to accomplish, and we hope to stimulate you and to give you faith and help you to know and understand that the whole Bible hinges on Genesis 3:15, where it talks about those who are diametrically opposed to the Almighty, and then it talks about His seed, His offspring, His sons and daughters who are to accomplish these things and to rise up a kingdom such as this world and worlds to come has not seen, to raise up a faithful, obedient people and to put asunder all of this darkness and all of these enigmas of ignorance that we have been very lacking in understanding. So I would like to take you back to this old book, The Lost Continents of Mu, by James Churchward. And I think that he makes some very, very interesting points. I'll jump around for just a minute, but on page 45, he tells us of the Nakals from the east. Now, once again, like we just got on quoting from the National Geographic magazine, and the East always implies, in all of these cultures, I think we've proved it by now, the Eastern Star, the Morning Star, plays a great part in it. And there's Khan, there's Cain, there's Mu, Lemura, the Mayan, the Aztec, the Toltec, these different ancient Indians of Peru, some of whose small beads, very small artifacts. So if the government comes knocking at my door, I've got a couple beads in a bowl that they can carry away. But you see, pretenders to the throne. In other words, you were adopted out. You were separated from your parents at an early age, and some people have come back and have claimed right to your throne. One thing that angers me a great deal is when so many of these pablum-puking liberal authors, so that they may gain the attention of more of the publishers and have them to publish their findings, which, thank God for some of them, but why do they insist upon trying to cover up and make excuses from the low-life, low-bred, degenerate bastards like the Mayan? And I use it from the Hebrew. I'm not trying to be vulgar. The word bastard means mamzar, those of a mixed seed. And you talk about, all you have to do is look at their own statuary and depictions of themselves. They were a hideous people. Showed in many cases they had pin heads, very much like those on Easter Island, which I maintain they were connected to. And I do not disagree with Churchward and others in toto that I think that there was at one time a greater land mass that connected Europe with America, and as far as Easter Island and some of these other great land masses. And like if we are to believe it, the Mayans talk about the three great lands. We'll get into that a little later on, and how they were broken down into 10 separate tribes. It sounds very much like a repetition, a copying, and a forgery of the true Israel of the Bible, the descendants of the Semitic people, of the Adamic people. And I will show you how stupid and asinine some of these brilliant researchers and archaeologists can be. But look, let the facts lie as they are. Do not try to cover them up, make excuses for them, and confuse the history any worse than it is. But as I go back, something that might be interesting, I should note this man that wrote The Lost Continent of Mu, he researched into the Lhasa, L-H-A-S-A record. All right, he's researched into the Easter Island tablet, and to the Greek record, and to the Torano manuscripts, T-R-O-A-N-O manuscripts, and plus various other records and South American records and the Easter Island tablets and the Indian and the Mayan records and etc. But now remember, I should fill you in, his contention was that at one time there was this great teeming continent of humans who were perpetually gay and happy, just like the Chinese said that they were for 20-some thousand years, until the heavenly warlords came in and interfered and diffused, shall we say, their lifestyle. But this great continent supposedly had 64 million human, if you like, inhabitants that reigned supreme. And all of this life, they were rejoicing in their luxurious homes, and they spoke of broad and smooth roads that ran in all directions. Now I think that you remember that we come upon through the Americas, and especially in Peru, some of the most gorgeous and fantastically engineered highways that seem to start and go nowhere. So, as this when a lot of these continents disappeared, and this was part of original highway that possibly ran thousands of miles from these exiled from space original colonizers who came here, who were given an opportunity to start over. But at the time they narrated that the 64 million people that made up, they said, now this is according to his research into the Mayan records, that they made up 10 tribes of people, and it said each distinct from the other, but all under one government. Now, we have taken you back, and we have shown by a lot of the books of the, oh my gosh, why do I blank out like this? The books of the Zohar, forgive me. The books of the Zohar, where the great adversary that rebelled against the Almighty, and no, don't say we're picking on the black people, I'm picking on the dumb white people, and I'm not going to leave anybody out. Because if the adversary is truly, indeed, in control of this world here, then where are you? You don't have to die and go to hell. You're already there. Because if the Almighty's not here and running things, you're in hell. But in the books of the Zohar, it talked about the kinky-haired, dusty race, who were the swordsmen and axemen of the adversary, the fallen one. And so here where he's talking about 10 tribes or peoples, and he says they were each distinct from the other, but they were all under one government. So, you see, the great Khan came when he come to this earth, and all of the different tribes of people. But a lot of those ancient peoples, we will never know exactly who they were, from whence they came, or, well, let's see. Now, we've taken you back to Peru, to the Americas. You go back and research into some of von Daniken's works, and there's been many others that have said very much the same things, that in the temples of the Americas they showed the heads carved into the walls and the buttresses of Nordic-looking men, Greek-looking people, one and the same, but they're features that are undeniable, and those of the Negroid races, and those of the Asians and the Mongolians, and then you find all different types in between, which could be called a hybrid subspecies. In other words, when you crossbreed any or all of these races, you get an admixture. And then as you notice, among these ancient Mayan people here, there seems to be a lot of birth defect. And you can see, if you study, let's see, well, I'll recommend 2 or 3 books here. One is called The Mayan, the 4th edition, revised by Michael C. Coe, C-O-E. There's another one that's entitled The Mayan Factor by Path Beyond Technology, by Jose Angeles. And then, as we're quoting to you from Churchward and the continents of Mu and so forth, but getting back to them, but the point I was trying to make there, that as you look through those 2 books that I quoted, just, well, you can get a good encyclopedia, I would imagine, and I'm sure that there's, as you search the used bookstores and the libraries, you can see some of the hideous depictions of themselves. I mean hideous. And if you do not agree with me, I would say you are in terrible need of some glasses. But you'll find some of the depictions of their peoples look very much like the long skulls on Easter Island, undeniable. And then you see the quite a number of them have the very thick lips of the black African people. They have the bulbous eyes and the big nose of the Canaanite people of ancient antiquity, that even the Bible said in several places, you shall know them by their countenance. Now, as I spoke of evil people back there among the Israelites, they told you would be able to tell them by their countenance. But if I was to go into Scotland, they said, yeah, we have some bad people here, I wouldn't be able to tell one from another, because I said they all look like Scots. But so much for that. Now we find here that many generations before they told about now listen to this. That's on page 48, The Lost Continent of Mu. Many generations before, the people had selected a king and added the prefix Ra, R-A, to his name. He then became the heretical head and emperor. Now notice, emperor, like the emperor of Japan. An Asiatic term, if you like. And we know that the people of Egypt, they worshipped Ra, remember? And I find it very strange that in Israel, maybe it's just coincidence and the English spelling, but I find the Ra in the middle. But anyway, it goes on to say that many generations before the people selected a king, they added the prefix Ra to his name. He then became the heretical head and emperor under the name Ra, Ramu. The empire received the name Empire of the Sun. Thank you. You remember what I said about Cain being the sun god. And we understand the raw. Now, let's go a little further with his interpretation. He said all follow the same religion, a worship of the deity through symbols. All believed in the immortality of the soul, which soul eventually returned to the great source from whence it came. Now, remember to fill us in on that, where we quoted to you about the Egyptians. They spoke of going back to the house of life. Our Christian Bible, the New Testament, speaks of the tree of life, and we are equated to the leaves of the tree. And so great was their reverence for the deity, they never spoke his name. Please turn your tape over at this time, and we will continue on the other side. Thank you very much.
I want you to notice one thing. They never spoke his name. So why? Big deal, you say. So what's that got to do with the price of eggs in China? All right, it's very simple. They were suddenly confronted approximately 7,500 years ago, possibly longer. But the best that we can honestly trace and show a chronological order to the first appearance of the Semitic or the Adamic type man upon this earth, they were confronted with a stranger who had literally invaded their world. Now, I'm not talking about invading the lost lands of Mu. Some of the areas that were left around, such as found in old Mexico and in parts of Asia and India and etc. But the interesting thing to note, this new invader who was to destroy their government, and later on those known as the laws of Mahabharata, who were many of the laws were cruel and they were unjust and they were opposed to the laws that were dictated to Moses in Mount Sinai. And so we had a conflict from the beginning, and we know this is true because Christ was called the second Adam. So apparently even the first wave of the great multitude of the Semitic man, he was first deceived through brainwashing from these other people. Instead of doing the dictating, they were dictated to and they listened to. And, well, we know the whole sad tune there. But we find that one reason that the children of Adam started going downhill is that these ancient Edomite, these descendants of Mu and Lemura and the Mayan and what have you, they just had all these different name changes. But they realized how powerful the Israelites were and from whence they got their strength. And they said, well, you worship Yahweh. They said, yes, we do. And they said, well, he's a pretty powerful God. Oh, yeah, he's the greatest of them all. Oh, yeah, he's to be worshipped and deified, and he's powerful, and he is the epitome of all the gods. Well, if he's so great, then maybe you shouldn't throw his name around. It should be a sacred thing, and at very most, just pronounced a time or two on the high holy days. And so maybe you ought to call him some other names. Give him some subtitles like Lord, and then you could always bastardize it down to Jovi or Jehovah and, and some of these other books. Now, folks, this is something, I'm not trying to be clever or blasphemous. This is not something that I have made up. But there are several Bibles out with a preface that explains how the sacred name has been taken out of your Bible thousands of times. So we forget who the God originally was. And then with the help of the translators, but so much for that. But I noticed that there was a great similarity here that they said that the empire received the name Empire of the Sun. And is that not a depiction of Japan, the land of the rising sun? And did they not say that their ancient great warlords and their emperors were descendants of the gods who came from space? And is this not where they got the kamikaze, the divine wind, where these pilots were to become a human bomb and throw themselves into our ships and aircrafts and land bases and to become human torpedoes? Why? Because they were promised that they would go like the Viking to Valhalla. They would go back to the house of the rising sun. Yes, there is a land for ages and eons that has been deceived by Cain. They still wear the emblem of the sun god, just like the new flag of the Bangladesh, with a black background and a red circle in the middle. And if that doesn't show you that that's diametrically opposed to Christendom as the North is to the South, because you find that most of the Christian nations were, now a great example is like Canada, when they have taken on that disgraceful red oak leaf. Kind of reminds you of what Adam and Eve supposedly covered their private parts with, because they found out it was the private parts that had committed the offense against the eternal. So they lost their flag, made up of the red, white, and blue, the Union Jack, that went back in antiquity when Joseph crossed his arms and he blessed Ephraim and Manasseh and made that cross. But so much for that. And so we find that as we research into the records that these people of Mu, that their reverence for their deity, they never spoke his name, and in prayer and supplication they addressed him only through symbols. Ra, the sun, was used as the collective symbol of all of his supposed great attributes. And as high priest, Ra, Mu, was a representative of deity and religious teachings, and it was thoroughly taught and understand that Ra, Mu, was not to be worshipped as he was only representative. Now, we find that this Cain, or the Khan, the descendants of the great Khans, because I am suspect of these people who said that so-and-so lived 900 years and this guy, he lived 800 years, because why would the New Testament talk about man was a lot of 70. What I believe is that the reign of the house of so-and-so, shall we call him Joshua, and we'll give him the figure of 800 years, he and his descendants ruled that throne and that nation, that area, for 800 years, because you heard the old saying, the king is dead, long live the king, the new king. And so Cain, I think, or Khan, the great leaders, they were smart enough to know that they could only go so far with this blasphemy without exasperating and making him come to a boiling point as the Almighty Yahweh. But this upsets a lot of orthodoxy and the religious world when you remind them the Scripture says, the Almighty tells us, I made both the good and evil. I am the potter and you're the clay. I make the vessels of good and the vessels of evil. And he tells how he used the Assyrian to chastise the people of God because of their disobedience. And we have to remember, obedience begins at the house of God. And so we find, again, other scriptures, oh, why do the heathen rage? Why do they think a vain thing? Why does the enemy come into our land like a flood? The Almighty's aware of all of this. He would be our Army, our Navy, our Air Force, but we would not have it so. Anyway, going back to the time of the people of Mu, they were supposedly highly civilized and enlightened. They were, according to their records, if they're believable, there was no savagery on the face of the earth, nor had there been, since all of the people of the earth were children of Mu and under the supervision of the motherland. In other words, they were all brought into submission, shall we say, one of the early forms or types of communism. But yet when they say that there was no violence, but I'm sure that throughout all the lands to keep them scared and intimidated and so forth, they had their daily, weekly, monthly, and yearly super sacrifices. Because all we have to do is look at the symbols in themselves that they left behind, shows them cutting off people's heads and for one of their great gods to consume, and indulging in cannibalism. So I have to take issue with Mr. Churchward when he is, or he was self-deceived to believe that there was no violence on the earth. Now, once again, there's another point here where I think that he was self-deceived by the ancient racial characteristics of these people of Mu, because all one has to do is, like I say, look at their artifacts that they left behind, and you can see a fluctuation and changing of the races of the ancient peoples of Mu as they would absorb this group of people from this land or island or this part of the continent. And as they said there was 10 different peoples, if we're to assume it's talking about 10 different racial types. Now he goes on to say in page 48 and 49, he brings out the fact, he said that the dominant race in the land of Mu was a white race. And he said that they were exceedingly handsome people with clear white or olive skin. Now, which is it? White or olive? It's got to be one or the other, or both. So it shows an infusion of the different peoples here, and it goes on to say they had large, soft, dark eyes and straight black hair. Besides this white race were other races of people with yellow, brown, or black skin. They, however, did not dominate. These ancient inhabitants of Mu were great navigators and sailors who took their ships all over the world, from the eastern to the western oceans, from the northern to the southern seas, and they also learned architecture, building great temples and palaces of stones, and they carved and they set up monoliths as monuments. Now, what did he say? They were great sailors. These were also, they were called to other people, and at a later time they were Phoenicians. Now, you see, they would tell us that Cain was Semitic, but 1 John in the New Testament says he was of that wicked one. And the 12th chapter tells you who the wicked one was. And I think we've proved conclusively that Adam was not the father of Cain, or the great Khan. You see, that Eve, or the peoples of Eve, produced this individual, and I believe that his father, and I can only judge by the evidence of these ancient people of Mu, and how we see this sun worship, and the worship represented Ra, and it represented the great Khan, and it represented the jaguar king, the leopard king. And so we can't help but add all of this evidence up, and it seems that Cain, the great Khans that came to this earth, that took it over, they would appear as white people. They probably had the black hair from the Asian side. And then from the olive side, he says here, so they obviously married in with Mediterranean types or Negroid types of Africa and so forth, and we have seen those that have, as they moved in from Africa, and we pointed out that in a brief period of time, Egypt was overcome by the black race, and they dominated it for a while. But it seems, let's see, I probably can't find it. Well, I'll go into that a little later on. We have a new book here. I think it was Life magazine. And it shows that teachers of the school weren't sure what to teach, whether Cleopatra was a black lady or not, and whether the ancient Egyptians were black or not. Well, apparently they have not taken the time to look at the depictions of the people on the walls of the tombs and on the sarcophaguses of the many ancient kings, and studied the time period. So it sounds to me like we ought to clear out a lot of these dumb teachers, and we should put in some honest teachers who will not mislead the black kids or the white kids, and will tell them the God's honest truth. Now, we find that these great sea travelers, the great Phoenicians, as I told you before, they were the ones that took the gold of Ophir from the plains of Shinar, yes, from Peru. And it was a payoff to that Solomon, who had knowledge, but he never was able to apply wisdom to his knowledge. Look what he did to his people and how he enslaved them and brought the curse of God Almighty Yahweh down upon them by introducing all of these strange 700 different wives that he had, and every one of these damnable wenches that came in there, they started nagging him and browbeating him, wanting him to build a temple to their damnable God. And so the children of Israel became lost, and they were into mental bondage and financial bondage, and they were used and abused by all of these strangers, just like today. There's nothing's happens not now happening that shall not happen again, as the Scripture says. The stranger shall come into your land like a flood, and this is what took place back then, due to Solomon. Sounds like cousins or grandparents to some of our leaders today, like Mr. Bush and the Kennedys and all of those other East Coast liberals who opened up the floodgates to bring in all of these unassimilatable people that are diametrically opposed to our culture, our heritage, our ancestry, and our religious beliefs. But if we speak out against it, we're racist. But if they speak out against us, that's perfectly all right. It sounds kind of one-sided. And they scream anti-Semitism. I tell them, don't you tell me that, because I happen to be Semitic. You're the one who is anti-Semitic. But then we cringe back like a pack of cowards and we don't speak up. If you don't use it, you're gonna lose it. So you better stand up and become, if you want to remain the land of the free, you better start becoming the home of the brave. So we go back to the land of Mu. It tells us that there flourished 7 great or principal cities, and the seat of religion and science and learning. And there were many other large cities and towns and villages that were scattered, what they called throughout the 3 lands. Now, I just wonder, are they talking about, now you'd say, well, that's obvious, 3 different continents. But we know how this word land or world is interchangeable in these ancient languages and is easily confused. But how come the ancient great Chinese sage of 200 A.D. that we recited to you, that he turned around and he said that this great Lord that came in the black ships of the yin and the yang, they were able to cross and cover the 9 lands in moments of time. Was he talking about ancient worlds, planets? Or was he talking about 9 great seats of government throughout this world? Well, we're left to wonder about these things. And if any of you folks run into evidence on this, I would certainly like to look at it. Now we find that back in those days, they spoke of the land of Mu as the mother and the center of Earth's civilization and learning, trade, and commerce. Notice, trade and commerce. Like that fellow back in Ezekiel who got his butt kicked out of heaven, got it kicked out of the throne of the Most High, got kicked out of his worlds out there. He was no longer allowed to govern. And he's come here now. Now, according to the records and descriptions and the traditions, man's event on the earth was in the land of Mu, and in this account was called the land of Kui. Excuse me, K-U-I. I believe beyond the shadow of a doubt. It was also identifying this as all of the other signs and symbols that this was the land of Cain. And so K-U-I was added to that of Mu. Great carved stone tablets without roofs, sometimes called transparent temples, adorned the cities, and the roofless, thus meant to permit the rays of Ra to fall upon the heads of those in supplication and prayer. a symbol of acknowledgement of the deity. Pardon me. Now the wealthy class, they adorned themselves in fine raiment, many jewels, precious stones, and they lived in great imposing palaces, attended by many servants. What does it sound like today? That sounds like a lot of these wealthy, condo-dwelling sun worshippers of Miami and California. I remember earlier we spoke of Gilgamesh. On another tape, game, like you hunt game for the dinner table, and ish. In other words, the man, game he hunted. But supposedly this great account, and we can't, in the light of scientific understanding of today and realizing, looking back in the age in which he dwelt, and also we find Ezekiel, where this loudmouth, who was dwelling in the land of Tyre, who was one of the prince of the colonizers on this planet, spoke of a day when they thought that they would regain, if they didn't have it then, that they would regain the knowledge and the power of the atom and the hydrogen bomb and etc. And they have hoped to find some brains that somebody would build them something, and they would find their way back to the house of life, as the Egyptians called it, or the tree of life, as our scriptures, modern scriptures, call it. But I wanted to point out in the Mayan factor that was written by Jose Arguelles, that, let's see, it was on page 166. He points out, and from what he deduced from their ancient records there, as their Mayan second coming. Now, this man was obviously a Mexican, or a descendant, at least, of Mexico. And maybe he was searching for his ancestry and for his ancient god or gods. So he left us with a question on page 166. Is there a Mayan second coming, a Mayan return? Is Kukulkan, Quetzalcoatl, Pakal, Votan, are they planning to check up on how things went once he and his galactic cohorts finished their harmonic calibrations on Earth and the third harmonic gyroscope out of the local star of the sun? I tell you what, the man's no dummy. You ought to see the work and his interpretation and how he brought it all down to great mathematical science and equations. I tell you what, he bears out what I've said. Only, apparently he spent a great deal of time. Looks to me like he spent years in his research and his study. And, it's a mind-boggling book. I don't know as I agree with everything in it, but, oh boy, I would say if you're really interested in this subject, it's really worth getting, my friends. And so, let's see, we find also, as I was referring to this, the quoting from the Lost Continent back there a while ago, that page 49 where they spoke of the colony, the empire, and I think also of Wales. Now, a lot of people are not knowledgeable in the difference between the English and the Welsh. There is, or the British and the English. They think, well, this is speaking of one and the same. Well, there's a lot of mysterious things going on over there in England. There's a little area just a few miles in circumference there they call London. London has an autonomous government of its own. And it seems to be very much like our Federal Reserve. Only the gods know who controls it, who owns it. It has never been audited. No, my friends,
It does not belong to the federal government. It is privately owned. And you study the book of the Rothschilds, his biography in there, autobiography, he said, I care not who rules the country, so long as I control its wealth. There is the real seat of government, as we have jokingly said, that old saying, the golden rule, if you got the gold, then you can rule. Because without gold, without some sort of money, commerce, your eating habits, everything comes to a total, complete stop. So if one was honest and was still able to find the books, and you go back into the English history, and you'll see mentally, spiritually, physically, genetically, a great difference between the original British that were run out of England back into Wales by the English. Now, I have Welsh friends, and they are not all bad people. But I'm saying Wales was the seat of bad people, just like England. And some of them are still there today dominating the country. Some are still dominating Wales. And, well, let me ask you this question. I went to a friend of mine who was, forgive me, I can't remember what you call him now. He was a flagologist. A very nice man, very brilliant man. He's well versed on the flags of the world and why and who had this and at what date. He's very impressive, and he's called upon to speak at all kinds of dinner engagements and banquets. And although I've never heard him other than sitting privately with him, he's a great talker or speaker on the subject. But I said, sir, I am rather confused. Why is it that Wales, who periodically on documentary TVs, I see pictures inside of their churches, and they're singing religious songs and all, and what lovely Christian people they are. But if this is so, that why then is their main flag got a red background and a green dragon on it? Read Revelations 12. And then they have another flag with the dragon in the middle and 4 little ones, one at each corner. Was this one of the ancient seats of the adversary? Yes, I think so. All right, you say, well, what has all this got to do with me? What has it got to do with the present? It's some very interesting listening. Maybe you'll say that. I hope so. I hope you don't think you spent your money in vain. But once again, let me bring to your remembrance something I think very important. It says those who will not learn by history are bound to repeat it. And the only thing we seem to learn by history is that we don't learn by history. My friends, the clock is ticking away. The people are in the midnight hour. They have been so spiritually and mentally blind for so long, they don't even know this is the culmination and the entrance in, and they're standing in the very epitome of darkness, or a vortex, black hole of spiritual pygmyism, shall we call it. Allow me to give you something to think about. How many church-goers ever stop to think or to realize that there is a possibility that, because every great nation that has ever existed upon the earth was prophesied, told of, spoke of in the Bible. But you say, where do we find the United States in the Bible? My friends, it's that in itself, I could fill another 6-pack here, as I call it, another 6 tapes on an album. But let's go back and show you something that the religious world has ignored and not understood. Let's go back behind the scenes and let's rediscover the documented story of a great crisis that is stealing up on and culminating now at this very hour in our land. It all started out on a stark, rocky island back in the days of antiquity, and to the horizon that stretches the vast empire over the murky deep. We find one lone figure in antiquity who's resting upon a barren ledge of sheer rock. His name is John the Revelator. He was wrapped in vision, and he sees a fantastic
strange beasts, and he sees clashing armies and nations rising and falling. Now it's no surprise that the greatest nation on earth should be mentioned in prophecy, and John sees and portends events that are shaping up in these United States that most definitely will affect you, my friend, my listening friends. And you remember in times past I told you, JER, USA, the new and unwalled Jerusalem that is prophesied and spoke of in Ezekiel, the 38th chapter, and I told you that the ancient Gaelic language says the America. It meant the kingdom of God here on the earth. Well, my friends, I'm afraid at the rate that we're going, as those of you who heard Mr. Brown's tapes, who said, like the scripture tells us, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth, those that say we're not under the law, they defy and they ignore the laws of the Most High God. Then there's a terrible bill to pay back. To be conservative, they've estimated that we have murdered 30 million of our children before they even got out of the womb, not to mention those that are abused and used and tormented and die from all other situations. Somebody's got to pay for that. So right there's 30 million lives that have to be paid for by those who will not recant and turn from this terrible, insane slaughter, this infanticide against the very race and the peoples of America. So it's no surprise that the greatest nation on earth should be mentioned in prophecy. And what did John see? He saw all the events that shaped and led up to this final hour of what is to happen in the United States and what is definitely going to affect you. I want you to watch closely now as we'll try to unfold this scene. And we go back to Scripture and it says, "And I beheld another beast. He came up out of the earth, and he had 2 horns like a lamb, and he spoke as a dragon." We find this in Revelations 13 and 11, where it speaks of a beast in prophecy, and it represents a kingdom that Daniel spoke of in 723, chapter 7, 23rd verse. Now, get this. I know that there's other connotations, and God willing that we can bring this out in our studies in the book of Revelation. But my point here being at this time, Christ called us the sheep of his pasture, his defenseless, stupid little lambs. Now we have to know and understand that when a beast he comes up out of the sea, he is represented as a rising among many peoples and multitude, a highly populated area. Now Revelation 17:5, it talks to come up out of the earth. Just the opposite. Here's a nation that's springing up out of a wilderness area. And instead of overthrowing other powers to establish itself, this nation, it rises in territories previously occupied. It would be a country that was discovered, not conquered, differing from the often blood-soaked history of the nation of Europe, or the nations of Europe, we should say. This one that was prophesied by John, it was to spring up quickly and relatively peacefully like a lamb. But yet later on in its history, this was not true in toto, because you find in Isaiah it speaks of this nation as who was terrible from its beginning. Then we became terrible. We had to in our own survival and defense. Now, can you guess what nation of the world rose into power, giving promise of strength and greatness that would fit this description? It could be none other, sure, the United States, the land that everybody in the world badmouth, but they all want to come here because of our so-called limited freedom. But right away, as soon as they get here, they start braying like a jackass in a pepper patch and belly aching, and they want to change everything. Now I want you to notice something here that I think they've all missed. It springs up like a plant from the ground. A prominent author of the past century, he spoke of the mysteries of her coming forth from vacancy, and adds, like a silent seed we grew into an empire. And then we had 2 horns like a lamb. The lamb like horns, they indicated the youth and the gentleness and the long-suffering. It represented civil and religious freedom. And then the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution reflected the noble ideas and views of the progenitors of this new land. And because of this very principle, our nation was to become great, and the oppressed and the persecuted from the four corners of the earth. They started to look to the U.S. and they started to flow in with new hope in their hearts. It was the gathered members of the Anglo-Saxon, Celtic, Adamic, Nordic, Aryan, Teutonic, Lombardic, Germanic, Basque, and kindred people that constituted the lost ancient tribes of Israel that Isaiah tells you in the very first chapter. The ox knows his crib, the sheep know their master, but my people do not consider. And even when the pilgrims stepped aboard the ship, they read from the scriptures, get thee up unto a land that I shall show thee. And they knew that this was preordained, pre-picked, and predestined, and they were the predestined people, and they had hope in their heart that they would be the very seeds that would establish a new and unwalled Jerusalem, a kingdom of God right here on this earth, fulfilling the prophecy, thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth. But then we see a sad turn of events taking place here. But the beast with the lamb-like horns, he spoke as a dragon, and when he exercises all the power of the first beast before him, and he causes the earth and them which dwell upon it to worship the first beast. And it goes on to speaks of the deadly wound, and he was healed, and he does great wonders, and he maketh fire come down from heaven on the earth in the sight of men. Incredible. Now keep your eyes open. Now we were quoting from Revelation 13:12 and 13. But keep your eyes open. You're going to see a great drama unfold here. You say, what has this got to do with the ancient people of Mu and Lamura and all of those that were diametrically opposed to the Yahweh God, the Lord of his Israel Semitic peoples? Well, you're going to see the clash. The final curtain has been drawn. There was many battles in great antiquity that were fought in the heavens. Christ said so. And if you don't like that, you take that up with him. But I'm telling you, my friends, that the final curtain has been brought down on evil. And those of us left alive, he will have our attention. But keep your eyes open and don't miss. Here as this great drama is unfolding, you're going to see miracles of a most amazing nature, saying to them that dwell upon the earth, they shall make an image to the beast, and he that was wounded by the sword and did live. Revelation 13:12 to 14. I know they all want to blame it on the Catholic Church, but can you imagine the United States doing anything like that? How could it be possible? Now get this. Now from the idioms and the etymology and the symbolism, I'm going to show you something here that we have not noticed before. The lamb-like horns, and then the dragon voice. It shows a schizophrenic change of personality and its headship of this nation being changed, a real change. And then speaking of this country as a dragon denotes not only the use of force, but the principally, we're going to see, as was used by the leopard beast. To get the symbolism, the leopard, the jaguar, the dragon, we are not speaking as the lambs of God. Yes, we're using force, and we're killing innocent people. We're killing third world people that all they want is a place to live out their life and happiness and to be left alone. They're not a warlike people going after us, but you can't run millions of people into the desert and give them no answers and not expect them to fight back because they have no alternative. And so here I would note to you, and I think that through the Mayan connection, shall we say, that you see of the dragon, you see the leopard king, you see the descendants, the great grandsons of these evil people who worship the sun god. They worshiped Ra, they worshiped the dragon, they worshiped the leopard king, all different names and different titles. So we find in Revelation 13, when enforced religious observation also, I think is included here by law, as such actions as by the United States government, it will be directly contrary to the original grand scheme of things of the principles of our religious freedoms that were established by our progenitors. And the Constitution, it provides that Congress will make no laws respecting or establishing of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof. Note, speak as a dragon. Our nation? Do you hear it stirring? Have you noticed the attitudes becoming more and more intolerant and angry, to say the least, as of late? Angry at crime, angry at
political, religious, and social corruption? No. They are angry against those of us who would speak out against them. And I would have you to know one of the signs of the times that people cannot understand because they do not want to be spoken against. It's hard to stand up when there's so few of you. But you notice every standing ovation at a play or any great performance always starts with a handful of people, and then the rest join them. They wait for those intelligent few to see it, to stand up. And throughout our land, all these Sunday laws, sun god, Sunday, and one of the great understandings of the commandment, one of the great commandments, remember the Sabbath and keep it holy. But we keep the Sabbath of the adversary, of the dragon, of the sun god, those that are diametrically opposed to our God and his enemies. It's the same old enemies. It's the same old battle. It's just the names and the places and the the names of the geographical locations and places have changed. The enemy is not blind as to who the Semitic, the Adamic children of the Most High are. Yes, as the great ships of antiquity, under the direction and the guidance of the great Michael, the great archangel, he's going to still fight his ancient foe of those who served in the very same Air Force, that same extraterrestrial army that rebelled against the Almighty, but to this time he's been refrained from avenging any personal grudges. And so down through the ages and the eons and the time periods, God's enemies, who are not blind, who have not forgotten, who know, and are now going to fight in this final hour, as they know that it is their last ditch stand, as they shall be cast by the Almighty into outer darkness. Was he talking about a black hole or what? I believe that we had better conclude our tape here at this time. We appreciate your letters and your help. Those of you who are able to, write Noah Fredericks or Pilgrim Ships, P.O. Box 1086, Lakeview, Missouri 65737, and we thank you so much for listening. Goodbye.